the only reason I'm not in prison for the rest of my life is luck. Because just after my 18th birthday, I pointed a gun at 2 people and I pulled the trigger. And it's only luck that they didn't die. While I was in prison, I met guys who had pulled the trigger intending to kill and missed and gotten minor charges. I also met guys who had pulled the trigger just running and shooting over their shoulder and not thinking and scared out of their minds, and they took a life and they're spending the rest of their life in prison. So I can't control what happened after I pulled the trigger. I can't control the result, but I was responsible for the action. And I know that I am no better or no more deserving than those men who went into prison doing something out of fear and out of impulse and out of instinct, not having any intention to kill, but being held responsible. One of the things I think is so important is to recognize that we are not defined by our worst moment. Society may see us that way, prison may see us that way, other people may see us that way, but we don't have to see ourselves that way. Because if I saw myself as only the worst things that I'd done, or as defined by the worst things that I'd done, I would be irredeemable. I spent years believing I was irredeemable. I spent years struggling and believing there was no way forward, but I had enough people who believed in me. I had enough support, I had enough opportunities that I came to see that I was capable of much more. And through tutoring other people and watching the smile on somebody's face when after struggling for months and really years to get his GED, Big Baby got his GED. And he came in and he picked me up and he swung me around and he was streaming tears. It meant the world to him, and I had a part in that process. That wasn't destructive, that was building. Those were the experiences that showed me that I could create where I had previously destroyed, that I could do something good where I had previously done harm. And that's really what changed my life. And that's the problem with punishment. We take people and we stick them in prison, or we stick them in detention, or we stick them in suspension or expulsion from school, and we don't say, hey, here are ways you can do things better, or here are coping mechanisms we can use to try to help change your behavior or change the way you do things. We say, hey, we don't want to deal with you. We're going to stick you in the corner. We're going to lock you in a box. Yeah, you figure it out. Now, again, I was really lucky. I had a lot of support. I had a lot of people who believed in me. I had a lot of opportunities, so I was able to figure it out because other people helped me get there. There are a lot of people who don't have that. And the other thing is, we're all a product of our environment. People don't want to believe that. They want this myth of like exceptionalism and like, I'm just a great person. And no, like we're a product of our environment. And some people transcend that and rise above that. And that was my experience in prison. Because prison was not an environment designed to shape healthy, happy people. It wasn't designed to shape and rehabilitate people. It was designed to house them. And in many cases, it was designed to traumatize them. So when I look at these kids, especially the kids in the juvenile center, like I'm going in tomorrow, so many of these kids came from a place where they never had a chance, where they never had the love or support. They never had the structure that really would have allowed them to succeed. And some kids get lucky and they find a teacher at school, or they find a family member, they find a community member that invests in them and they find a way out. But the vast majority don't, because they have the deck stacked against them, And when I think about those kids in there, and I think about the fact that people have labeled them as like dangerous and violent and scary, and some of them have. Some of them have picked up a gun. Some of them have taken another human life. But when I look at them, when I sit with them face to face, I just see a kid. I see a kid who was scared, or a kid who was angry, or a kid who felt like he had no other option. And when I think about that, and I think about the experience that he was in, I recognize that anyone in his experience, anyone in that environment, anyone who had been in that situation with his perspective would have done the same thing. So when people stand on the outside and say, oh, well, they're just dangerous. Well, they're dangerous because we failed to show up as a society to meet their needs. We failed to create a safe environment. We've failed to make sure their parents had the tools they need to succeed. When I look at some of the family experiences these guys had, it used to really break my heart, people coming out of certain neighborhoods, or especially coming out of foster care. And the abuse and the trauma, this cycle that just happened, because the parents didn't want to be bad parents. They didn't mean to be bad parents. They didn't know any better. It was the only thing they'd experienced. They didn't have the opportunity of generational wealth and good parenting classes and great opportunities. They had been abused, and they abused, or they neglected, and they mistreated. And that's the way it happens until somebody finally finds a break. And sometimes you get those exceptional kids, and they get out and they do things differently. And when they have their own kids, they act differently. But so often it's just a cycle that continues. So when I talk about investing in kids, and I recognize that I'm no different than that kid who's serving a life sentence right now. I'm no different than that guy who did something heinous out of fear in a terrible time, because I did something terrible. I didn't try to take 2 people's lives. People talk about that. They're like, oh, well, what was your intention at that moment? If you've ever been up for days at a time, strung out on drugs, terrified out of your mind, and purely in fight or flight mode, there is no intention. There's no intellectual process at all. It is all instinctual. It is like being a feral animal. And when we take somebody who has been in a feral state and made a terrible decision or done a terrible thing, and we say, oh, well, you should have thought this through, it doesn't even make sense. We're having conversations about two different worlds or two different existences. So in reality, yeah, I should have not been on drugs in the first place. I also needed access to treatment and programs that would have helped me understand what was going on, to teach me emotional regulation, to teach me distress tolerance and interpersonal effectiveness, to teach me how to set boundaries, to teach me how to deal with the struggles of life. And I didn't have those. And that's why when I say, hey, we need social emotional learning in schools and juvenile detention centers, we need DBT classes, we need peer support networks, what I'm saying is those are the things that would have helped me. I am where I am because I found those things after I went to prison. I found that love and that support and those opportunities after. But what if I had found them before? What if we could find them before for all those kids who are on their way to juvie or on their way to prison? What if rather than reacting to a crime, we could actually create the support and provide the services that would allow them to get the help they need before they hurt someone else, before they hurt themselves? We have a system that's reactive. We like to respond to a crime with punishment. We like to respond to a situation with punishment. We don't say, hey, let's invest in this. Let's invest in this community. Let's offer free parenting classes. Let's offer counseling. Let's make sure that every kid in this neighborhood is getting medical checkups. Well, we say, oh, well, that's not our problem. And we have this zero-sum game mentality that like helping them is going to take away from us. When the reality is we're already paying for incarceration. We're already having kids go to broken schools and go to broken juvenile detention centers and end up in broken adult prisons. And all that is being paid for. I, for one, would rather pay for a parenting class or a social emotional learning class or a mentor program or something that's happening in the community that's creating opportunities and that's healing wounds rather than just making them worse and worse. Because every major study has shown the further someone goes into the criminal justice system, the more likely they are to reoffend. We don't think about that. That's not just saying, oh, well, bad people do. No, literally diversion programs work. Restorative justice programs work. Having alternatives to long-term incarceration works. So those are my thoughts because I realized that I could just as easily be labeled a murderer. I could have taken people's lives. I committed the very same act that other people did. I just had a different result, and that made me lucky. I could just as easily be in prison for the rest of my life. I could just as easily be somebody who had not reformed or had not changed their life or hadn't found a way forward. And I only found a way forward because I had support and I had love and I had opportunities. And so when people ask me why, I say I do this because there but for the grace of God go I.